Sydney walked away, feeling a mix of relief and excitement. As she turned a corner, Daniel approached her. "Hey, Sydney, you're quite the Luca fan, huh?" Daniel asked with a sly grin. Sydney tried to sound nonchalant. "What makes you say that?" Daniel chuckled. "The way you lit up when he took your water. I've never seen you smile so brightly." Sydney's face flushed. "You're just annoying." Daniel laughed. "Oh, I'm annoying. That's rich coming from someone who's clearly smitten." "I'm not smitten. Luca's just nice." Sydney defended herself. Daniel teased. "Nice. You were ready to cry when Leah gave him her water first." Sydney sighed, exasperated. "Daniel, stop." Okay. Daniel held up his hands. "But mark my words, Luca's got you wrapped around his finger." As Daniel walked away, Sydney rolled her eyes, but couldn't shake off his words. Sydney gazed across the hallway, rolling her eyes at Daniel's flirtatious antics with a girl. His charm irritated her, especially since he seemed to effortlessly captivate everyone's attention. She turned back to Jeanette, recounting her encounter with Luca at the basketball court. Jeanette listened intently, sparkling with excitement. After school, Sydney strolled home, finding Mr. Volt busy in the kitchen. "Hey kiddo, I made lunch," he said, presenting a mouth-watering spread. "How did you have time? You're always busy with inventions." Sydney's eyes widened. Mr. Volt chuckled. "Even inventors get hungry. I figured I'd make extra, just in case." Sydney's curiosity piqued. "Just in case? It's just the two of us." Mr. Volt hesitated, nearly mentioning Daniel's name before remembering his promise to keep his presence a secret. "Oh, you know, just in case anyone drops by," he said casually. Sydney raised an eyebrow, but let it slide. After lunch, Mr. Volt retreated to the storage room, leaving Sydney to tackle her assignments in the sitting room. However, her focus waned as she detected a faint noise upstairs. Her curiosity piqued. She recalled the suspicious sounds from the previous day. Determined to uncover the source, Sydney crept up the stairs, her footsteps silent. Unbeknownst to Daniel, who was attempting to gauge her awareness of the noise, she caught him off guard. With a swift motion, Sydney delivered a sharp wallop, sending Daniel tumbling to the ground. Stars danced before his eyes. Once he regained his bearings, Sydney ushered him to the parlor, where she applied a bag of ice to his throbbing cheek. "Seriously?" Sydney exclaimed, frustration etched on her face. "Irritating me is one thing, but stalking me to my own home?" Daniel smiled wryly, wincing in pain. "Stalking you? You wish." He gingerly tended to his cheek, muttering, "A girl's leg can pack a punch. Feels like a mountain range crushed my face." Sydney filled Jeanette in on the Daniel debacle over the phone. Jeanette's astonishment was palpable, even through the line. Just then, a knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Daniel, lounging in the sitting room, got up to answer it. Sydney entered the room, and her eyes widened in shock. "Luca, you?" Daniel said, surprise etched on his face. Jeanette gasped on the other end of the phone, sensing Sydney's distress. Sydney's mind raced as she struggled to process the unexpected encounter. Luca stood in the doorway, a warm smile on his face. In a panic, Sydney introduced Daniel as a cousin. Trying to play it cool, Luca nodded and extended his hand for a handshake. However, Daniel merely smirked, ignoring Luca's gesture. Luca's eyes narrowed slightly, sensing tension. "Nice meeting you, cousin," Luca said, his tone laced with skepticism. Daniel turned and left, leaving Sydney feeling awkward and flustered. "Sorry about that," Sydney muttered to Luca, trying to recover. Luca shook his head. "No worries. I'll catch up with you later." "Okay." With that, he turned to leave. As Luca turned to leave, Sydney beckoned him back. Hey, come in for a minute. Luca hesitated, but Sydney's persistence won him over. Just as he stepped inside, his phone rang. Leah's name flashed on the screen. Luca's expression changed as he answered. Hey, what's wrong? Luca said, his voice laced with worrying. Sydney watched, concern etch his face. Sydney couldn't help but notice Leah's sobs on the other end. Luca's eyes clouded, and he listened intently. Sydney sensed something was amiss. Is everything all right? She asked, her voice soft. Luca nodded, but his expression betrayed him. Yeah, I've got to go. It's urgent. Without waiting for Sydney's response, he rushed out, leaving her feeling concerned. Sydney watched him disappear into the distance, her mind racing. She knew Leah's struggles with her dad were a sensitive topic, and Luca's reaction hinted at a deeper issue. Shaking her head, Sydney decided to push the thoughts aside, focusing on her own tangled emotions instead. Daniel wandered into Sydney's room, and his eyes widened in surprise. Luca's photos plastered the walls, showcasing Sydney's obvious admiration. Wow, you're really invested, aren't you? Daniel muttered, chuckling. Just then, Sydney burst in, her face fiery with rage. What are you doing in my room? Daniel feigned innocence. Sorry, wrong room. But his smirk betrayed him, and Sydney's anger flared. Get out, she demanded, hands on hips. Daniel retreated, taunting her. Luca, everywhere. You're like a fangirl. Sydney chased him out, her face burning with embarrassment. Shut up, Daniel, she shouted, slamming the door. Daniel's laughter echoed down the hallway. Love struck Sydney. It's adorable. Sydney fumed, her heart racing. How did Daniel always manage to get under her skin? Sydney finished her schoolwork and spent hours clearing her mind on the rooftop, watching the city's nightlife unfold. As the streets emptied and darkness descended, she returned home. Mr. Volt was already asleep, so Sydney decided to continue her evening routine. However, she noticed Daniel was still awake, engrossed in video games. A wicked smile spread across her face as she approached him. Hey, Daniel, come downstairs with me. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Why would I do that? Sydney's smile grew wider. You leave me no choice. Daniel's eyes narrowed, sensing something was amiss. You know, don't you? Daniel's voice dropped, his eyes darting around the room. Sydney's grin confirmed his suspicions. Daniel Golden, the privileged son of the Prime Minister's campaign, sent away for being too wayward, too careless, too much of a liability for your father's election. Daniel's face paled. Mr. Volt told you, didn't he? Sydney chuckled. No. I overheard your conversation with your dad earlier. He has no idea I know. Daniel's eyes widened, realizing he was being blackmailed. You're threatening me? Sydney shrugged, phone in hand. Call it what you want. Daniel knew he was cornered. Fine. He surrendered. Sydney's triumphant smile gleamed in the dim light. After their sparring session, Daniel collapsed onto the couch, exhausted. Sydney, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. Daniel marveled at her skills. You're incredible. I shouldn't be surprised, considering you're always awake. He chuckled to himself, thinking about her crush on Luca. Another side of Sydney altogether. Sydney caught him laughing. Seems I didn't punch you enough. Daniel raised his hands in surrender. No more, please. As they watched movies, Daniel's fear of scary films became apparent. Despite his efforts to hide it, he screamed and instinctively hugged Sydney tightly. Realizing his mistake, Daniel quickly released her, his face flushing. I'm sleepy, he muttered, fleeing without a glance. Sydney smirked. Such a crybaby. Daniel's embarrassment lingered, but he couldn't shake the image of Sydney's carefree dancing earlier. Each new side of her he discovered left him more intrigued.